Hello there. How are you guys doing? I started doing something at the beginning of this year, not necessarily trying to do a yearly resolution kind of thing or anything. It just kind of happened. So I thought I would talk about it. This is a video about music, basically, and very off topic for this channel. Not many people know this, but my favorite band probably in the world is Sade. I know that seems super random, and if you don't, if you're not familiar with their music, you might be going like, "What, the smooth operator chick from the '80s? What's that about?" But I actually got into Sade in the '90s with the Love Deluxe album. And I kind of was like, I just fell in love with that album, and I went back and I got all their old albums. That's the only band that I have every single album of theirs, like on CD. And by the way, if you're getting confused and I'm using the word band when I'm talking about Sade, that is actually the name of the band. The band's name is Sade. The lead singer, her name is also Sade. Her last name is Adu, so the lead singer is Sade Adu. It's kind of like Bon Jovi. The lead singer's last name is Bon Jovi, but the band's name is also Bon Jovi. Sade and Bon Jovi are similar in many ways. But anyway, the reason I'm talking about this is that somebody shared on Facebook recently, not too long ago, that Sade's working on a new album. And I was like, yeah. They release albums like every 8 to 10 years. I mean, they're very rare when they put them out. And again, I can't explain why I fell in love with this band. It's just really good. So if you haven't ever really had a chance to listen to the Sade outside of like their hits, I suggest you do it. It's really smooth, jazzy kind of. I just like it. So I don't know. Shut up. But anyway, when I heard that they had a new album on the way, or that they were in the studio working on a new album, I got excited, and I hadn't really listened to them in a while, so I got on Spotify, and just while I was driving around, I started listening to their albums. And I just kind of went from start to finish. I started at Diamond Life, and I went through, what was the next one? Stronger Than Pride. Now, there was Diamond Life, Promise, Stronger Than Pride, Love Deluxe, Lovers Rock, and then Soldier of Love. They kind of got all into the love later on. But anyway, I listened to it front to back for every single album in order, their entire discography. And it was just kind of cool to listen to it and kind of look at how their style changed over the years, and how, each album kind of had its own flavor and whatnot. And I started thinking that was a really cool thing to do. Like, that's not something I've really done with any bands before. I mean, I listen to certain bands and I have albums and that kind of thing, but to actually like listen to an entire discography of a band from start to finish, I just thought that was an interesting experiment, or an interesting like deep dive. And so I started thinking, who would be a good band to do that with next? And I thought, well, why not the Beatles? Here's the deal. I know that the Beatles have a huge fan base. A lot of people absolutely worship the Beatles. Let me just start off by giving you my history with the Beatles, which is I've never been a fan. Like, my wife and I, we talk about this, and she grew up with her mom listening to the Beatles in the house. So she grew up with the Beatles. There was no rock music playing in my house when I was growing up. It was all country music. It was Glenn Campbell. It was Oak Ridge Boys, Alabama, and ABBA. Somehow, my dad loved ABBA. But I had no real exposure to the Beatles. Like, I knew who they were, but I never really listened to them. I knew some of their hits and whatnot, just because I'm alive and they play them everywhere. I will say, I remember when I was a kid, Michael Jackson was the big thing in the 80s. And I knew Paul McCartney as the guy who sang with Michael Jackson. Like, I knew who the Beatles were, and I knew Paul McCartney as the guy who played with Michael Jackson. I did not know that he was in the Beatles. Again, I was a child. And I remember fairly recently, I guess Paul McCartney did something with Kanye West, which, just saying that sounds weird. But there were all these like people on Twitter like, ooh, Kanye West is going to make this old guy famous, because they'd never heard of Paul McCartney. And part of me was like, oh my God, you people are idiots. But then the other part of me was like, well, I thought the same thing about him with Michael Jackson back in the day. I just didn't have a place online to show everyone how stupid I was. But anyway, I never really grew up with the Beatles, so I didn't really understand them, and I didn't really have that flavor in my life. And when I went off to college and there were other people that would listen to the Beatles, I'm going to just be straight with you, and I can't say why, because I don't know why. I kind of developed a hatred for the Beatles. Every time I heard them, I was just like, ugh. It just didn't appeal to me. I felt like it was both lazy and pretentious to claim to be a Beatles fan. And to be completely honest, I just didn't get their music. I didn't see what was so great about it. So for me to decide to listen to the entire Beatles discography from start to finish, weirdly, I had to kind of get over myself a little bit. I talked recently about the whole identity thing. We kind of lock ourselves in this identity. You think of yourself as a certain type of person. And again, I can't tell you why I kind of had this weird thing against the Beatles, but I've always had it. It's always been there. And I had to sort of let go of that to listen to this. And now that I've listened to it, and along with that, and maybe this is just me, I don't know if everybody else is like this, but I'm certainly the kind of person that I can't just casually experience something. I get curious. I want to find out more, and I go and I research. And not that I was researching all the different Beatles albums and stuff, but I would listen to it, an album, and then be like, so what was that about? And I would go look up things about it. So I kind of went down a few rabbit holes because that's just how I do. But I do have some thoughts, and I thought I would just share these. So the first thing that came to mind that kind of blew me away about the Beatles that I'd never really thought about before was that from Please Please Me, that was released in 1963, to Let It Be, which was released in 1970, that's 7 years. The Beatles were only together for 7 years. And to see how much they changed from when they started to where they ended, I mean, yes, music in general changed quite a bit over the 60s. That is a whole other topic, a whole other Pandora's box that I could go into. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. But they changed so much in such a short amount of time, and they influenced the world and the music world so much in such a short amount of time. It's kind of breathtaking. So regardless of whether I like the Beatles or not, even before or after this experience, gotta hand them that. That is extraordinary. And actually, when you look at the beginning of their career, I've got it in front of me right now. Please Please Me came out in 1963. Between 1963 and 1966, when Revolver came out, 7 albums. Please Please Me with the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, which one could argue is not really canon because it was sort of a soundtrack to a movie, but Beatles for Sale, Help, and Rubber Soul, and then Revolver. 7 albums in 3 years. Now, I know that back in the day, they kind of cranked stuff out a lot faster, and one of the little rabbit holes that I had to go into as I was listening to these was I had to... there were all these songs that were on these albums that I was like, wait, that wasn't the Beatles, that was Chuck Berry. And yeah, I mean, back in the day, they covered a lot of songs back then. So not all of the songs in the early albums were the Beatles. Some of them were cover songs. If you want to put an asterisk by that, fine. But that was another part of the whole experience of listening to all the Beatles songs without ever having really paid attention or listened to their catalog before, which is that so much of their music has been covered by other bands, has been sampled by other bands. It was kind of like this weird deja vu constantly while I was listening to these albums. It was just I was always hearing something that I'd heard before somewhere in a different format or in a different way with different voices, and it was always oh, that was the Beatles? Oh, that was the Beatles. Interesting. Or there would just be a line that I'd heard a million times quoted somewhere, and it's oh, that's where that's from. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of I'll stop. Sorry. Seeing how their sound changed from that sort of pop rock kind of thing that they did at the beginning with, Twist and Shout, Love Me Do, that kind of deal, all the way to at the very end with, Let It Be and the White Album and the experimental phase that they went through. So I'm not trying to pay myself off as some kind of Beatles scholar or anything because I've listened to all their albums now, but it is interesting sort of the phases they went through. Those 7 early albums that I was talking about, they were very pop rock kind of oriented, and then starting with, say, Revolver, they started to get a little bit more experimental. Sgt. Pepper's and the Magical Mystery Tour also just really just trying new things and just playing regular noises and whatnot. And then through the White Album, Abbey Road, it feels like they started to kind of let go of the experimental stuff. It was kind of like they were, okay, we've shot our wad with, seeing how far we can push things, and let's just, get back to songwriting. It's kind of what Abbey Road started to feel like, and then Let It Be, kind of the same thing. So if I had a favorite of the Beatles albums, it would have to be Revolver. And I'll be completely honest, I actually did have Revolver I bought it on iTunes way back when. That's the only Beatles album that I've ever actually owned and listened to all the way through. And I really do. I mean, I do have that sort of mental real estate, so maybe that's partly why I like it a little bit more. But I feel like Revolver is that perfect combination of that pop rock sound that they had in the beginning and the more experimental stuff. You know, it's like it was that cool, interesting transitionary period where they were like just starting to be like, you know what, let's try something new. Let's do something different. Let's push things forward a little bit. And by the way, Tomorrow Never Knows is still my favorite Beatles song. I think that's just like the most amazing thing in the world, and it's on that album. And again, maybe I'm just not wired for the really experimental stuff, but I didn't really care for a lot of what was in, say, Sgt. Pepper's Magical Mystery Tour and then the White Album. I actually wasn't that big of a fan of the White Album. I know it's like this big classic, and you can be screaming in the comments that I just don't get it. I clearly don't, but a lot of it honestly felt like they were trolling us a little bit. And I both am annoyed by that and I admire that, because it kind of feels like they were at this point where they're like the biggest band in the world, had been for years, and they were almost kind of like, let's just see how far we can take this. I feel like some of the songs off of that album were literally like Paul and John placing a bet, like saying, I bet you if we just took a bunch of horse noises and popped a balloon and then poured some water and recorded that, everybody would think that, you know, it was genius. And John's like, no, that would never work. Let's try it. Okay, bet. I feel like that's how some of those songs came out. Not to mention their lyrics. Yes, they were very drug-fueled. That's another thing. You can definitely tell through the progression of their music when the drugs kicked in. But while I'm saying I feel like they're trolling and I don't really get it and I don't really care for it, at the same time, you know, I'm not trying to compare myself to the Beatles, but as my channel has gotten bigger, I feel like I am not taking the risks that I used to take. I feel a little bit more kind of caged in. And that's all in me. Nobody is forcing me to do the videos that I'm doing. I'm choosing to do it. As the channel's growing, I want to kind of keep that momentum going. I don't want to rock the boat too much. But the Beatles didn't do that. They were constantly trying something new and trying to see just how far they could push. Even when they were the biggest band in the world, it was like, let's just keep innovating until we just fall apart and disintegrate. You know, until the fabric of space-time just dissolves around us. Like, I'm just gonna be honest, the song "Why Don't We Do It in the Road," it just kind of pissed me off, because it's literally the title repeated for 2.5 minutes over a very basic blues chord progression. And if you're the most innovative band of all time and you're literally just repeating a title over a very basic blues chord progression, that's like the laziest thing in the world, and it just pissed me off. But anyway, this was an interesting little experiment that I did, and I think I would like to continue it. Fact of the matter is, there's a lot of bands out there that are classics that people absolutely worship and that I've never really gotten into or listened to, just for the same reasons that I never really got into the Beatles. It was just not around me as I was growing up. David Bowie comes to mind. Led Zeppelin comes to mind. I don't really know their catalogs very well at all. So I'm thinking about kind of keeping this going. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I like the Beatles a lot more now than I did before. I will absolutely say that. I certainly admire them more than I did before. I don't have to get their music to appreciate it and appreciate what they were able to do. And I'm sure that's true of many other artists that I've just kind of known about on the periphery of my life, and I kind of want to expand that. So I don't know. It's something I might keep doing. I don't know who I'm going to go with next. It might be Bowie or Led Zeppelin. It didn't have to be classic rock. I want to kind of spread out. Might do some metal, might do some hip hop or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I want to put this out to you guys. Is there a band or an artist that you have listened to from start to finish, that you have every single one of their albums and you know every single song by heart? Do you have any suggestions for bands or artists that I should cover or listen to at some point? I'm all ears. I'm open to see what's out there. Anyway, that's it for today. I was just thought I would share that with you. I was talking to a friend the other day about doing this, and she thought it was really interesting, and I was kind of like, maybe it is interesting. Maybe I can make a video out of it. So there you go. Love to hear what you guys have to say. Hope you're having a good one. Take care. Love you guys. See ya.